Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and today we are back with another October Spooktober video. This one is about the Aurora, Texas UFO crash, considered possibly the oldest potential UFO crash. Before then, there had been a number of sightings throughout history, but this one is the first one we know of as a UFO crash, even though it's still not, claimed it's from outer space. It's uh, an Earth originating vessel or what. It's just UFO, unidentified flying object. So we don't know for sure what it was. On April the 17th, 1897, something crashed into a farm near Aurora, Texas. The pilot was buried in the Aurora cemetery with a simple grave marker. Now, the town, Aurora, Texas, is in Wise County, Texas, in the northeastern part of the state. Approximately just over 50 miles northwest of Dallas, Texas. To kind of give you an idea. And then let's read this portion here on April the 19th, 1897. An article in the Dallas Morning News was written by S.E. Hayden, and it goes as follows. A windmill demolishes it. Aurora, Wise County, Texas, April the 17th. To the news. About 6 o'clock this morning, the early risers of Aurora were astonished at the sudden appearance of the airship which has been sailing through the country. It was traveling due north and much nearer the Earth than ever before. Evidently, some of the machinery was out of order, for it was making a speed of only 10 or 12 miles an hour and gradually settling toward the Earth. It sailed directly over the public square, and when it reached the Earth, or the north part of town, it collided with the tower of Judge Proctor's windmill and went to pieces with a terrific explosion, scattering debris over several acres of ground, wrecking the windmill and the water tank, and destroying the judge's flower garden. The pilot of the ship is supposed to have been the only one on board, and while his remains are badly disfigured, enough of the original has been picked up to show that he was not an inhabitant of this world. Mr. T.J. Weems, the United States Signal Service officer at this place and an authority on astronomy, gives it as his opinion that he was a native of the planet Mars. Papers found on his person, evidently the record of his travels, are written in some unknown hieroglyphics and cannot be deciphered. The ship was too badly wrecked to form any conclusion as to its construction or motive power. It was built of an unknown metal, resembling somewhat a mixture of aluminum and silver, and must have weighed several tons. The town is full of people today who are viewing the wreck and gathering specimens of the strange metal from the debris. The pilot's funeral will take place at noon tomorrow. S.E. Hayden. Now, that's the actual story piece that was in the newspaper in regards to this crash in 1897. Let's take a look back over the story. So we know it was around 6 o'clock in the morning on the 17th of April. And they say it has been selling through the country. I don't know if it was seen elsewhere, but they also say the sudden appearance. So is it just assumption that it was already selling through the country based on what we knew? Because as of this point, the actual idea of airships like Zeppelins and other dirigibles, outside of the idea of hot air balloons, had been going since about 1852, I believe was the first time they came along. So we had discovered airborne flight. Let's see. They know it was traveling north because of the trajectory of which it crashed. Let's see. They think it was in trouble because it was only going about 10 or 12 miles an hour, which in the 1850s, at that point in time, the railroad could go much quicker. So it wasn't like it was blowing through the sky or anything. And of course, today we know the modern vehicle, the modern car, truck, whatever have you, can go about, speed limit here in the US is 66 or 55 to 60 miles an hour. So 10 to 12 miles an hour isn't anything spectacular. It's a decent speed if you're not on foot. But yeah, normally you only have carriage horseback, and train, or on foot. So it wasn't like it was zooming through the sky. And they said it was gradually settling toward the Earth in the article. Not a crash, a downward trajectory. It just settled. It sailed directly over the public square and then reached the north part of town. And when it reached the north part of town, it collided with the judge's windmill tower. And that's where they said it went to pieces. In what they call a terrific explosion. Now, they claim it was only flown by one person because they said the only one that was found was the pilot. And he was badly disfigured. Now, the signal officer, one Mr. T.J. Weems, proclaims the pilot is a Martian, not of this world. And here's another part I think is very, very interesting. Papers are found on his person. And they go on to say, evidently it's the record of his travels and are written in an unknown hieroglyphical language. Basically, not deciphering them. However, if this is an alien of such high tech, would they have papers on their person? Wouldn't it not just have been an electrical device? That's something that kind of makes me wonder. The ship was too badly wrecked to form any conclusion as to the construction or motive power. It was built from an unknown metal, resembling somewhat a mixture of aluminum and silver, and it must have weighed several tons. Now, as I mentioned before, we have already at this point been seeing flight. 1852, I believe it was, Gillard made the first uh, airship flight. And while flights of rigid airships are extremely rare, only 4 having been built that were completely out of metal, and only 2 flights of which were made. It has happened. So it could be that it actually was a combination of aluminum and some other metal. Maybe not silver, but we know aluminum, it's extremely tensile, um, can be shaped, formed without really breaking at a thin level. So you could really use it to really help develop a rigid outer shell. Maybe it was another metal besides silver. So yeah. Um so many people examining the wreck and gathering specimens or samples of the strange metal from the debris, and the pilot's funeral to take place. Blah blah blah. S.E. Hayden. That's directly just what we should understand from the article itself. What we do know, on April the 17th, 1897, a craft going through the sky crashed through Judge J.S. Proctor's windmill in a descending trajectory, landing or crashing just outside Aurora, Texas, around 6 a.m. Central Time. The pilot was buried at the Aurora Cemetery with Christian rites provided by traveling pastor William Russell Tabor. U.S. Army Signal Officer T.J. Weems proclaims the pilot was not of this world and a Martian. The cemetery in Aurora contains a Texas Historical Commission marker regarding the actual incident, and the wreckage is reported to have been tossed down a well that was under the windmill, with some of the other pieces of the wreckage buried with the pilot in the Aurora Cemetery. This is what we've been able to verify from multiple sources. Now, other notes. Judge Proctor's property was purchased by one Brawley Oates around 1935, and after cleaning out the well for a water source, he developed a severe case of arthritis. Oates sealed the well with a concrete slab in which the slab reads 1945, so we assume that slab was placed in 1945. And in the Aurora graveyard, we know supposedly where the alien was buried, there was just an old stone marker noting the grave. After an investigation that ended up on television, the stone did disappear that had been marking the grave. Let's get some other information here. In fact, the fact that the stone went missing, there was an offer for the return of the stolen grave marker that is being offered by a Dallas lawyer. I don't know if that offer's still available. But yeah, and this is from an article in the Star Telegram, dated March the 30th, 2018. Hmm. Yeah. The grave marker was stolen in 1972, around the time that a nonprofit MUFON published an investigative piece about the Aurora incident. A replacement marker was also stolen in 2012, said the Aurora City Administrator Tony Wheeler. So, yeah. So we know the grave marker has went missing. Um, and the actual um, story has been investigated on numerous occasions. Um, one report was broadcast by a local television station, KDFW Fox 4, and two other reports aired on cable television. The KDFW report was in 1998. Um, there was no real decisive conclusion made, but they did note about the plaque put up in the cemetery that outlines the actual tale itself and calls it a legend. And then you have on December the 19th, 2005, an episode of UFO Files that aired related to the actual incident titled Texas's Roswell. And it featured a 1973 investigation led by Bill Case, an aviation writer for the Dallas Times Herald, and the Texas State Director of MUFON. The actual investigation shows MUFON uncovering supposedly 2 new eyewitnesses to the crash. One, Mary Evans, who was 15 at the time, and then Charlie Stevens, who was 10 at the time. Evans' report tells of how her parents went to the crash site, forbidding Mary from going, and how the alien body was discovered. And Stevens' report um, talks about how he saw the airship trailing smoke as it headed north towards Aurora. He wanted to see what would happen, but his father made him finish his chores. And his father went to town the next day and saw the wreckage from the crash. Um, MUFON supposedly did investigate the cemetery and uncovered a grave marker that appeared to show a flying saucer of some sort, as well as readings from its metal detector, and asked permission to exhume the site. But the Cemetery Association declined that permission for that. And after that investigation, the marker did disappear from the cemetery, and a 3-inch pipe was placed into the ground. MUFON's metal detector no longer picked up the metal readings from the grave. Thus, it was presumed that the metal was removed from the grave. So, yeah. And the other cable television report was from the TV show UFO Hunters on November the 19th, 2008. Um, it showed some changes from the UFO Files story. Tim Oates, a grandson of Brawley Oates, and now owner of the property with the sealed well where the UFO wreckage was purportedly buried, allowed the investigators to unseal the well in order to examine the possible debris. Water was taken from the well, which tested normal except for large amounts of aluminum present. The well had no significant contents. It was stated in the episode that any large pieces of metal had been removed from the well by a past owner of the property. Further, the remains of the windmill base were found near the well site, which refuted statements from a 1979 Time magazine article that Judge Proctor never had a windmill on his property. In addition, the Aurora Cemetery was again examined, although the Cemetery Association did not permit exhumation. Um, Ground penetrating radar and photos from prior visits showed that an unmarked grave was found in the area near other 1890s graves. However, the condition of the grave was so badly deteriorated that the radar could not conclusively prove what type of remains existed. And then the landowner gave them pieces of metal that contained mostly aluminum and an unknown element. So yeah. Um, I do have a piece from the dallasnews.com, and they kind of call it a a hoax. Yeah, they say that it did bring tourism to the town eventually for the crash. But one thing they do note is that um, there was a decline in the population for the town of Aurora due to a case of spotted fever that killed several people and caused several more to move from the town. So yeah. Now, couple other notes we should take note of. This was in the age of um, airships, dirigibles, zeppelins, but the flight of a winged craft or an operated airplane had not yet happened. That wouldn't be until December of 1903, 6 years later, and at just south of Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, by the Wright brothers. And another thing to note was the news did have a tendency to exaggerate the truth, stretch it a bit. Um, what kind of news was it called? Yellow journalism. It was in the age of yellow journalism because you had papers often exaggerating the truth or outright creating stories. One of the big examples of this would be in 1899, 2 years later, with the sinking of the USS Maine. I think it was USS Maine. Um, wherein the papers got America into a war with Spain, a war we would win, giving us control of Cuba, Puerto Rico, um, the Philippines, and the Mariana Islands. But yeah, so it's we can't give full trust in the newspaper article. it could be used as a source, but we need to take it with a grain of salt. Because the actual fairness doctrine, introduced in 1949, is what helped set our um, news on a truthful path. Although that rule was broken apart by the FCC under Reagan's administration in 1987 through several court cases. But that's for another time. Now, what do I believe happened? Given what we know, we know that the story may have been exaggerated. Because you imagine if a race is that advanced, they wouldn't have papers on them. They wouldn't be going just 10, 12 miles an hour. I feel it was a semi-rigid airship going through the air and crashing through the windmill. Most likely terrestrial. With a semi-rigid airship, you would have the inner balloons or air sacs filled to give the ship lift, but they're surrounded by a metal frame. Not the entire outside is not metal, it's just a frame of metal. And this is most likely of aluminum. Perhaps there's other metals involved, but mostly going to be aluminum. This would make sense because those were around. It wouldn't have been going quickly. It said about 10 to 12 miles per hour. So, if they were indeed having trouble, I could see such a craft coming down and striking the windmill and breaking it into pieces. The pilot, if it weren't too big of a semi-rigid aircraft, probably could have been one. That I'm unsure of, but I think it probably could have been one pilot, thus the only one found. But yeah, now don't get me wrong, I do believe there are such a thing as aliens. The simple fact of numbers, when you look at our galaxy, with the potential for millions upon millions of planets, there's bound to be other habitable planets besides the Earth. And that's just in our galaxy. When you step outside the Milky Way galaxy, you have other galaxies. And they have millions upon millions of planets. So, the simple fact is, just by pure number, there's going to be life out there. Now, have they come to Earth? I can't say they have or haven't. But, if they have, perhaps it was just on accident. Why would you want to come to this little backwater, you know, of an area? We're destroying our only planet, for goodness sakes. Why would you ever want to come to a planet like this? But yeah, my instinct tells me this is probably a misidentification of a semi-rigid airship. And that's kind of my feeling upon it. Please go ahead and, if you have different thoughts, let it be known in the comments below. But as always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tries to tell you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. Speaking of which, I will have sources in the description. I'll see you all in the next video. Until then, later.